Welcome to the next lesson here where we're going to be exploring everything you need to know about webhooks and Zapier. The specific use case of why a webhook would come up in an AI automation is when Zapier doesn't natively integrate with a specific feature from one of the apps you're trying to use. Therefore, this allows it so we can still build out that functionality you want, but we may just need to use a custom API call. Now, there are three main reasons why you'd use a webhook in an automation. The first being that Zapier just doesn't support your app at all. Therefore, we're going to have to go to documentation to understand how to integrate that into an automation. The second reason would be that Zapier supports the app, but they don't support a specific action within that app. And then the third reason is that they support the app, they support the action, but within the action, there is a specific variable that we still can't add data for. Okay, let's go ahead and jump in and understand everything we need to know about webhooks. To do so, we're just going to go ahead and begin, and let's do a webhook here. Do webhook, and let's go ahead and explain all the different events and what they mean. The first thing you should understand about webhooks is not only can they be the trigger, but they also can be the action. The context that we use a webhook as a trigger, and we use the event of catch hook, and we go ahead and get a URL here. Essentially what we're doing here is we're waiting for data to be sent to that specific URL and to be used in the automation flow. Now, if you're using a webhook as an action, you have three main choices here. You have get, post, and put. Get is essentially going to grab data from another source or maybe another third-party app. Post is essentially going to push that data. Think of it like Postmail. Put allows you to create new data or update existing data. Finally, custom requests allow you to patch or delete, but in the context of AI automation, we will mostly use either get or post. So before we jump into a live example here, let's just go ahead and figure out how we'll find the documentation for the specific app we're working with. Typically, all that requires you to do is type in the app's name. So for this example, we'll type in Calendly. We're going to type in API documentation. Go to the first option here, and as you see, we are at the documentation. Now, some apps have better formatted documentation, some apps have worse formatted documentation, but typically the way you go ahead and observe is you're going to come over here, and as you see, it has all the different capabilities we can call upon. So as an example, if we went to activity log, list activity log entries, you will notice we have the URL here and we have the function of get like we referred to earlier. Here is a different option in the documentation, the function of post, and then the specific URL. So for today's example, what we're going to do essentially is with the trigger from MailChimp, there is an event here that we can't necessarily do. In the context of a specific subscriber changing their email address, as you see there is no way we can incur this action. So we're going to use a webhook instead. I'm going to go ahead and change this event back to webhooks. We're going to do an event of catch hook. I'm going to continue. Let's go ahead and test it. Here we go. We don't have to test it yet because we actually haven't sent any data to it yet. We can go ahead and copy this webhook and let's jump over to MailChimp. Coming over to MailChimp and audiences, we're going to go ahead and simply find webhooks. Now, just for your context, anytime you want to deal with webhooks and third-party apps, they will always typically have a whole tab dedicated towards it. So for more reference here, if we go over to Calendly, as you see here, if I go to integrations, webhooks and API calls are found right there. But for this use case, since we're looking at MailChimp, we're going to go over to settings. We're going to hit webhooks. We're going to go ahead and take the URL that we just had for the trigger, paste it here. So now it's listening for this event to incur. We're going to go ahead and uncheck box because we're looking for when the user changes their email address. So email changed. There we go. We'll go ahead and save. Perfect. So we went ahead and configured that webhook here. Let's go ahead and make sure it can get example data here. So we're going to go ahead and go to one of these subscribers to our list here. We're going to go ahead and change the email address here. So we add like a 123, and then we go ahead and save change. Perfect. Let's go ahead and trigger that action, get some test data going here. And there you go. So the original old email was courses, and now the new email that it just triggered for is courses 123 that we just created together. So in this context, maybe what you want to do is then send it as a Gmail. So I went ahead and make a Gmail block here. And I went ahead and did an event of send email. Continue. We're going to choose our courses account here. Hit continue again. We'll input that into the body. We're going to say old email for subscriber, semicolon, put in the old email here because they gave us the old email from that data point. We do new email, semicolon, and then we can put that there, send that off. So essentially what's occurring here is that the webhook is waiting for data to change specifically for any subscriber for the email address. When that occurs, it'll run this flow. Really cool stuff. Now, looking at the test data here from Stripe, if you're looking for the webhooks here, a lot of apps have a nice little search bar. So if I just typed in webhooks, it will take me directly to their version of the webhooks on their backend. So if I say add endpoint, this is where I would put in that Zapier URL to do different functions within Zapier's documentation. Now let me show you a real quick little tip here on how to troubleshoot errors you face when dealing with webhooks and APIs, because it can get pretty complex here. Essentially, we can use ChatGPT. I'm not going to do this all live, but in theory, if I really wanted to, what I would do in the context of Calendly's API documentation is I would load it into a chat like this and then basically proctor it depending on what I was trying to achieve. But just for an example, have our first page here from the documentation talking about API conventions. I could come back here and just say, we are going to fine tune this chat to understand Calendly's API documentation. Here is page 1, semicolon, put the link in, just understand the page. Hit enter. From there, you could add multiple pages within the API documentation, and maybe more specifically on the action that you're wondering about, you would upload that web page onto ChatGPT as well, and just get into a one-on-one dialogue with ChatGPT to help circumnavigate potential issues you run into when dealing with webhooks. Now, to wrap this up, there are two types of errors you could see when dealing with webhooks, and the first one being a 400 error. A 400 error means that the actual function itself wasn't put in correctly. Therefore, you're going to have to refer to ChatGPT or the documentation in order to make sure that you're structuring your post or Git correctly. If you get a 500 error, that just means the app itself isn't functioning right. So go ahead and give it some time, try again a little bit later, and it will typically resolve itself. Perfect. Now you know how to use webhooks and call upon custom API calls within apps that may not have natively integrated actions within Zapier. Let's go ahead and jump into the next lesson here, where we're going to build out an AI article generator that you can start using in your own business and start selling as a service for other ones.